So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear friends, dear fellows. The Simon Wiesenthal lecture series takes place regularly 5-6 times a year and aims to present the latest research findings of the Holocaust, on the Holocaust to both professionals and the broader audience. The lectures cover an impressive spectrum of this discipline, numerous issues ranging from empirical analytical historiography to topics of cultural studies, and involve young scholars as well as established academics. So as I see in this audience, we have a very nice mixture of younger and established scholars. Since 2007, when the Vienna Wiesenthal Institute for Holocaust Studies was established, the lecture series has developed into a flagship of our outreach activities. For over a decade, the Austrian State Archives offered shelter for the lectures in the foyer of the Haus-, Hof- and Staatsarchiv. And during the pandemics, they were really 2 challenging years. The lectures were held online, maybe you remember. From autumn 2002, so from this very day, a new cooperation partner, the Wien Museum, will work with us, which is a beautiful news, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank Matti Bunzel and his team for hosting this event. I would also like to share another important and very good news with you this evening. As of the 1st of October, we have a new director of our institute. Professor Jochen Böhler is an internationally renowned scholar on the history of violence in Eastern Europe in the 20th century. He studied history, ethnology, and economics at the University of Cologne, while at the German Historical Institute in Warsaw from 2000 and 2010. He established the research department War and Foreign Rule in the Age of the Extremes. Between 2010 and 2022, he was a chairholder for the Eastern European history at the Friedrich Schiller University in Jena. As a research associate at the Imre Kertész Kolleg, Böhler headed the research area War, Violence and Oppression. Dear Jochen, welcome to your first Simon Wiesenthal lecture. But now let's move on to our today's topic. I'm delighted to welcome Gideon Reuveni here. It's just over a year since we had the honor of a visit from Hella Pick, the British-Austrian journalist and Holocaust survivor and biographer of Simon Wiesenthal. Hella has a closer relation with the Weidenfeld Institute at the University of Sussex, whose director, Gideon Reuveni, is our speaker tonight. Hella suggested to both of us to get into contact, which by a happy coincidence had already taken place in another online conference. Since then, Gideon and I have been working on several future plans between the Weidenfeld and the Wiesenthal Institutes. One of them is a series of events linked to the anniversary of the Luxembourg Agreement. The opening event of this lecture today, but this is the opening event, this lecture today, but we also plan a joint workshop to create a platform for discussion of issues surrounding the redress of historical injustice, revealing the broader implication of the German Jewish settlement as a model of reckoning with an unwanted past. Gideon's main research and teaching interest is the culture and social history of modern European Jewry. He is the author of the prize-winning book Consumer Culture and the Making of Jewish Identity, Cambridge University Press 2018, The Jewish Experience of the First World War, Spring 2019, he was really productive, and The Future of the German Jewish Past, Memory and the Question of Anti-Semitism. It was published in 2020. He is currently working on a book-length publication on the history of German compensation payment to victims of National Socialism. The title of the presentation is The Phantom Giant and the No-Key Gate, the German Jewish Settlement and the Holocaust. Gideon, welcome again. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Eva, for this generous introduction, and thank you all for coming. just want to tell you that if you're going to get COVID out of this evening, it's not going to be for me because I already had COVID a few weeks ago. So it's a great honor to be asked to deliver this lecture, and it's always a pleasure to come and visit Vienna. I would like to start and say just 2 words on this maybe some awkward title that I now even make even more weird for you probably. So the Phantom Giant, the No-Key Gate, and the Beauty Salon of History. So I'm sure that if I would have given this talk in German, you would have immediately make this connection. So the Phantom Giant is the Scheinriese. It's a figure from Michael Ende, Jim Knopf, und Lukas, der Lokomotivführer. And it's a kind of a phenomenon of a person that when seen from a distance, he looks or appears like a giant, and once you approach him, he's a normal kind of size person. So it's in a way a kind of a different, kind of opposite for how we usually, our usual perception. And the idea here is that sometimes historical phenomena have also this kind of impact. The other kind of metaphor, or the no-key gate, is another kind of motif from Michael Ende's book, another book, The Never-Ending Story, where, as you probably remember, the hero needs to go through 3 gates in order to save the fantasy land and eventually save the world. And what is so unique in this gate is that in order to transpass this gate, you have to kind of not have the will to transpass it. So the more you want to go through it, the more the gate becomes closed, which is quite a paradox, because how you can go through a door only when you are not supposed to go through the door. Now, I use these 2 metaphors and saying that at the beginning because I think this very much, these 2 kind of figures or metaphors really much help me to conceptualize the topic that I'm going to talk about to you today, and hopefully throughout my talk it will be kind of clear why I use these 2 ideas to kind of frame the topic. The last kind of part of the main title is something that actually I added afterwards, and I will talk about this towards the end of my talk, and you will also hopefully, when you are still awake by then, understand why I kind of brought that also to this kind of idea about how to talk about the reparations, the German, what I call German Jewish settlement, and the Holocaust. So on September 10th, 1952, the Federal Republic of Germany, the State of Israel, and the Conference on Jewish Material Claims against Germany signed a reparation agreement in Luxembourg, in the Luxembourg Town Hall. The signing ceremony took place at 8 o'clock in the morning. Severe security measures were taken, especially for fear of Jewish extremists. Details about the event were not made public, and only selected number of news agency correspondents were allowed to be present. They were notified an hour before the event started by telephone call and summoned to a secret rendezvous place from which they were taken by car to the city hall. The Jewish delegations arrived early and needed to wait in a room where wedding was solemnized. Shortly before 8 o'clock, they made their way to the council chamber where the signing ceremony was to take place. Waiting for them before the venue was Chancellor Adenauer and his legation. This was considered as a gesture of respect to the Jewish delegations. Israel Foreign Ministry Moshe Sharet, and you see him here. This is Moshe Sharet, and that's opposite to him is Adenauer. Israel Foreign Ministry, Moshe Sharet, and Adenauer shook hands. According to one member of the Jewish delegation, Adenauer said to Sharet that he had waited to this day with expectation and joy. Sharet replied that for us as well, this is a special day of great significance. After the formal introductions, the three delegations moved to the council chamber for the signing act. Following the ceremonial protocol, the parties entered the room from separate doors. The German from one door and the two Jewish delegations from the other. The press was waiting with a number of photographers. The men took their seats at the long table opposite each other, and without further ado, started the signing. Adenauer and Sharet affixed their signatures to the agreement between Germany and Israel, two protocols, one committing Germany to adopt an improved legislative program for individual indemnification, and the other to pay 400 million marks to the Claims Conference, was signed by Chancellor Adenauer and Nahum Goldman, head of the Jewish Claims Conference. The agreement with Israel contained annexes, letters, and a schedule for deliveries of the various goods which also needed to be signed. The New York Times depicted the event as the first official amicable ceremony in almost a decade, in almost 2 decades, between Jews and Germans. It further commented that the ending of the negotiations was as bizarre as their beginning 6 months earlier. Their ceremony proceeded 30 minutes in total silence, and there were no public handshakes or speeches. Pictures of the event documented the signing as a solemn act. One sees almost no smiling faces. The press was not aware that the delegation met before, and because nothing was said and there were no physical contact or gestures of sympathy between the parties visible, reports of the event depicted it as a strange meeting, stiff ceremony and icy atmosphere that dominated the signing. Some newspapers even reported that when a German delegate offered Sharet a pen, he refused the gesture. Sharet denied that this ever happened. It was Nahum Goldman who came without a pen to the signing, he said, and Walter Hallstein offered him his. Goldman tried once, twice, 3 times, but no ink flowed. Returning the pen, Goldman allegedly said to Mr. State Secretary, "The first item you delivered to us is no good." Hallstein was not in the state to appreciate the irony and apologizes that the pen is sometimes moody. In his memories, Adenauer recalled how deeply moved he was when sitting opposite Sharet signing the agreement. He noted that for the Federal Republic of Germany, this agreement was a political event on the same rank as the Deutschlandvertrag, the German treaty signed with Western allies in May 1952, formally ending Germany's occupation and recognizing its sovereignty, and the treaty established the European Defense Committee, also signed in May that year. These were significant steps for the reintegration of Germany in the family of nations. For Adenauer, 1952 embodied the year the Federal Republic gained its independence. He further stated that if history books would dedicate even just one line to the German people efforts to correct the past injustice towards the Jews, the settlement would be a worthwhile undertaking for future generations. In the same spirit, focusing mainly on the meaning of the signing for Germany, US Secretary of State Dean Acheson welcomed the agreement. In a special press release, in a special press statement on the day of the signing, he highlighted the significance of the first article of the West German Constitution endorsing the dignity and the rights of all people as the foundation of the Bundestag Wiedergutmachung Resolution of September 27, 1951. Acheson depicted this resolution as a moving tribute to the determination of the German people that those rights shall not again be violated, and to purge themselves of the wrongs inflicted on millions of innocent people, appending that the agreements concluded today are material demonstrations of the resolve of the vast majority of the German people to make redress for the suffering of the Jews under the Nazis. After the signing, heads of the three delegations retreated to a side room away from the press for a private conversation. Since Adenauer did not speak any other language, the conversation was in German. Not in Hitler's German, Charette later remarked, but in the language of Goethe, a language they both learned before Hitler came to power. Adenauer assured Goldman and Charette that his government and the Bundestag are fully committed to the settlement. Given the aggravating pressure from Arab states and the opposition to the agreement within its own coalition, Charette considered this an important statement. Adenauer also expressed his hope that the settlement will comprise a stepping stone for a new relationship between Jews and Germans. Charette and Goldman extolled Adenauer's historical role in making the agreement. Yet they reminded him that a deep schism still lies between Jews and Germans, and that it would take time and much more than material Wiedergutmachung until the wounds created by the horrific Nazi crime could be healed. In reality, they were well aware that most Jews feel that there could never be an atone for the German moral guilt for the Holocaust. As one Israeli newspaper put it, the experience of 6,000 years of war taught states to forget the crimes of war when signing off for peace. Jews, however, who still remember the Jewish boycott of Spain, are not yet accustomed to such unemotional political notions. Nevertheless, on a very practical level, the contract, as it was referred to in official Israeli press releases, clearly marked the beginning of a German-Jewish exchange. At some point in their conversation, Adenauer became personal, telling Goldman and Charette that the signing evoked in him memories of the time when the Nazis removed him from office as mayor of the city of Cologne. He recalled how all his assets were frozen. Short of cash, he was forced to sell valuables to entertain his family. In this precarious situation, a Jewish friend offered financial support, keeping his family afloat. Charette and Goldman pushed the conversation to deal with the larger questions, underpinning the broad significance of the agreement. They hid to the moral connotation of the treaty, referring to it as a momentous departure that was not achieved under duress, but in obedience to the call of moral responsibility. To the press, Charette said that this act of reparation is fraught with historical significance. The settlement will play a crucial role for the education of the German people and as a historical precedent for the whole world, he stated. He further spoke about his feelings, conveying satisfaction and pride in an agreement that demonstrates Israel's moral power. Finally, Charette expressed his personal sincere appreciation towards Adenauer for taking this bold step towards Wiedergutmachung. The next day, on September 11, the Claims Conference and the State of Israel signed in New York the first ever official agreement between diaspora Jewish organizations and the State of Israel. These treaties were unique in the history of diplomacy. In contrast to conventional pacts between nation states, the Luxembourg Agreement was between two states and a non-governmental organization representing world Jewry. To formalists steeped in conventional international law, the notion of recognizing diaspora Jews as a discrete political entity, part of an international binding treaty, was, at the time, almost inconceivable. Although Israel instigated the creation of the Claims Conference, it reluctantly accepted the notion of Jewish organization representation as equal partners in the negotiation. But the Germans did not take a strict legalistic approach, seeking to reach an agreement with a rainbow of Jewish representatives. For them, the State of Israel represented just a section of the Jewish world. After the agreement was signed, Israel regarded it as the first international recognition of the connection between the State of Israel and the Jewish people. Indeed, Ben-Gurion noted that the German recognition did not oblige other countries, but for him, it was an important precedent that will consolidate Israel's claim as a state of all Jews. Furthermore, he and others extolled the close collaboration between Jewish organization and the State of Israel, depicting it as an unprecedented manifestation of Jewish solidarity and unity. The fact that non-Zionist organizations worked along Zionist ones was regarded as a new beginning in the relationship between Israel and the diaspora. Another unusual feature of the treaty was it was signed by two states between whom there were no diplomatic relations, and during the signing did not consider to establish such relations, even for the sake of carrying into effect the mutual contractual undertaking. Moreover, at the time of the Holocaust, neither of the State of Israel nor the Federal Republic of Germany were in existence. Not to say that because of what happened, de facto, the two states were in a state of war. These were somewhat extraordinary circumstances, and from an international point of view, none of the post-war German states were obliged to render amends to the State of Israel. In this respect, the Federal Republic of Germany opted to make a large-scale material gesture and so discharge the pressing moral obligation imposed by the Holocaust. As Charette often stated, this was indeed an entirely new phenomena in international relations. It set a precedent and contained a warning. Crimes of genocide cannot go unpunished, and the moral debt that arising therefrom must be paid. Back in Tel Aviv, Chaim Yachil, maybe some of you know, his wife was also one of kind of early Holocaust historian, Len Yachil. So Chaim Yachil formulated the Foreign Office position on the signing. He noted that the long struggle of the State of Israel and the Jewish people for shilumim, how it was called in Hebrew in Israel, or reparation, ended in victory today. Many, he commented, opposed any contact with Germans, anticipating that the talks will achieve nothing, fearing failure and humiliation. But the opposite happened. The Federal Republic of Germany admitted that unspeakable criminal acts were perpetrated against the Jewish people during the National Socialist regime of terror. The agreement offers substantial support to the State of Israel and relief to many Holocaust survivors. Moreover, the political and moral value of the agreement were presented as outweighing its concrete economic significance. According to this, Israel was the country that succeeded to bring Germany to declare its responsibility for the Holocaust. For Ben-Gurion, this was an act of empowerment, which should be depicted as an achievement of the State of Israel. Following this line, after the signing, Pinchas Lavon, then still a ministry without portfolio, announced in Israeli radio that the agreement was a moral and political victory for Israel. For the occasion, the Foreign Office even contemplated to publish a book celebrating this accomplishment as a historical, unique, and groundbreaking undertaking. While many feared that the agreement might entail the forgiving and forgetting of the Holocaust, the official Israeli position argued the opposite. To be true, since 1952, we have witnessed the development and growth of an elaborative commemoration culture of the Holocaust. Yet the German Jewish settlement hardly features in this memory. In the second section of my talk, I would like to briefly deliberate on why did that happen. This discussion will raise another, even more challenging question of how remembering the German Jewish settlement might affect, if at all, the study and commemoration of the Holocaust. What was considered as a momentous, empowering achievement that would possibly be seen as a milestone in Jewish and world history was quickly to disappear from the public eye. Both in Germany and in Israel, the German Jewish settlement became a political liability. Not only that in both countries, it did not help to win elections, threats of Arab boycott and possible wider implication of the agreement made it, so to speak, to a political hot potato. Moreover, in an age dominated by the threat of global destruction in the 1950s and 60s, it was Hiroshima, not Auschwitz, that dominated the memory of the Second World War. Thus, at that period of the Cold War, the menace of nuclear destruction cast a cloak of forgetting over the meaning of the Holocaust, diminishing the significance of the German Jewish settlement. On a more personal level, fostering this inclination were feelings of shame and guilt from both Jews and later educated Germans. For a large number of survivors from all over the world who were able now to claim individual indemnity, this support was of great material significance. Yet to be eligible, claimants had to comply with a complicated, lengthy, and expensive procedure implemented by the German bureaucracy. And this is a picture of how these claims looked like. On a psychological level, this process involved reenactment of the past, fixing the dependency relationship between the victims and the former perpetrators. Moreover, more broadly, it created a reality in which victimhood was codified and commodified, frequently eliciting feelings of shame and guilt for claiming compensation. There were also feelings of envy among survivors whose claims were unsuccessful, and also for those who were not eligible to claim. In other words, the process that rendered suffering into damage turned survivors into claimants. The immediate response to such circumstances was to repress and suppress the whole affair. Indeed, research had established that in the first decades after the war, survivors were reluctant to talk about their experiences in public. But this is only part of the story. Many survivors gave their first detailed testimonies in the form of individual compensation claims against Germany. And here, this is one of the testimonies, and it's just the first page. There are other pages.
Sorry, can I ask?
Yeah? Yeah? Many survivors, so the claims help survivors to frame their experiences into a meaningful story and shape the way in which they remember the Holocaust in ensuing years. Initially, these testimonies were considered to be a private matter, allied to financial demands about which, for obvious reasons, survivors' claimants were not keen to talk about. From the 1960s, this changed when the Eichmann trial and other major tribunals against perpetrators of the Holocaust took place. These court hearings turned the survivor claimants into survivor witnesses, thus shifting the discourse about their grievances from the question of damage caused by persecution to the actual suffering under National Socialism. We will return to this, what I consider an important point, later. It did not take long for West Germany to realize that the 1952 German-Jewish settlement encompassed moral and economic benefits. Yet from the 1960s, a new generation of Germans that questioned the action of their parents felt increasingly uncomfortable with the very notion of Wiedergutmachung, making good again. Such developments did not help the reputation of the German Jewish settlements. Moreover, even the men who brought about the treaty were likewise responsible for its oblivion from our collective memory. At the end of 1953, a special dinner in honor of Nachum Goldman was held in the lavish King David Hotel in Jerusalem to celebrate the German Jewish settlement. All the who's who of the Israeli politics and business at the time rallied to give tribute to Goldman's remarkable contribution. The main speaker of the evening was David Ben-Gurion, who used the occasion to celebrate the agreement as a political achievement without a precedent. To Goldman, he said that his outstanding qualities was his Jewish universality. In his reply, Goldman referred to the agreement as a moral triumph, admitting that no other signal effort in his long political career has given him more satisfaction. Years later, he even claimed that Ben-Gurion spoke of the German Jewish settlement as one of the two miracles he had witnessed in his lifetime. The first was the creation of the State of Israel, and the other, this agreement. And the first, of course, Ben-Gurion was responsible for, and the second, Goldman. That's how he saw it. To delineate these two events on the same level of historical significance, as one commentator noted, needed a considerable display of personal vanity. Yet on that particular evening, Goldman actually stated that he did not wish to be remembered exclusively as Mr. Shilumim or Mr. Reparation. At the time, he played with the idea of joining Ben-Gurion's government, and despite all the efforts to promote the agreement as an historical turning point, both he and Ben-Gurion were well aware that a too strong identification with Shilumim might prove as a double-edged sword in Israeli politics. Already at the beginning of 1953, Felix Shenar oops, I have no idea what, here. Felix Shenar, who was the co-head of the Israeli delegation to the talks with Germany, warned against the danger of not taking a clear moral position on reparations. He feared that the moral ambivalence will lead to a situation in which the state of Israel will receive German goods, while most Jews will still regard German as abominable people. In such a case, Shenar anticipated, the German Jewish settlements would become a crime against the Jewish soul, conceived as a cynical act that would poison the morals of future generations. Shenar was well aware that the Jewish emotions towards the Germans were beyond reproach. Yet, while he and others held the view that there were also decent Germans, they did not wish to go down in history as being responsible for an agreement evoking such strong resentments from so many Jews. As a result, even the so-called Shilumim men were content to see the affair removed from public discourse. What I find most fascinating about this propensity is that the German Jewish settlement was not forgotten because it was a failure. On the contrary, despite its unpopularity, officials from both sides considered the 1952 agreement as highly successful. Not only that it offered tangible benefits to West Germany and the State of Israel, with all the difficulties, it provided much needed material support to hundreds of thousands of Holocaust survivors. Moreover, in what follows, I will advance the argument that the so-called negative emotions towards the agreement turned the German Jewish settlement into a most effective poster of rapprochement, or kind of a type of reconciliation. Research did not heed much attention to the relationship between the 1952 agreement and Holocaust memory. I would like to suggest that there is an innate connection between the alienation of the German Jewish settlement and the effectiveness of a type of communicative action. According to Jürgen Habermas, when two or more people manage to coordinate their subjective interpretation of a situation and their plan of action by way of mutual agreement, they interact communicatively. For Habermas, coordinated activities established by communication are indispensable for maintaining a functioning social life. Seeing the German Jewish settlement as an expression of communicative action provides insight on the displacement of the agreement within the study and memory of the Holocaust. The German Jewish settlement was the result of a mutual deliberation that generate a close cooperation between Germany, the State of Israel, and Jews throughout the world. These type of coordinated activities were grounded in a mutual understanding of the immeasurable suffering brought upon the Jews due to the unspeakable criminal acts perpetrated against the Jewish people during National Socialism. The development of a shared narrative at the hub of which stood the notion of Jewish suffering and the sinister nature of National Socialism comprised a key element by which both sides came to form their collective identities after the Holocaust. For Habermas, however, the possibility of communicative action is grounded in rationality. There was much rationale, realpolitik, and moral pragmatism in the history of the German Jewish settlement. No less significant were deep-seated emotions that suppress a positive perception of the agreement as communicative action and a transformative event. Underlying the debate over whether Jews should accept German redress was the tension between doing what seemed right and what felt just. This tension between feeling and doing was never resolved, creating, as Shinar feared, a kind of a moral or perhaps emotional ambivalence towards the German Jewish settlement. A silent expression of this ambiguousness can be found in Ephraim Kishon's satire. On the background of a debate as to whether German films should be screened in Israel, Kishon published a short dialogue towards the end of 1958, in which he admitted that anti-German sentiments made no sense. I don't think that you see it, so I'll read it to you. And it's a kind of a dialogue, like, I don't know if you know Kishon's humor, but it's usually he's kind of represented there. So he's been actually asked or challenged. So he says, maybe I told an objective fellow citizens, but still I cannot stand German films in Israel. They make me sick. So the other says to him, one moment, the Austrian films too? They too. Well, you advocate the idea of nationalism? No. Do you know that Herzl spoke German? I know. Is Goethe responsible for the actions of the Nazis? Not responsible. Do you admit that there were decent Germans who sacrificed their lives to save Jews? I admit it. Do you know that Germany pays the shilumim or reparations and personal compensation punctually and fairly? I know. West Germany is one of the few countries, still today, that supports Israel on the international arena. True. We need their help, right? Definitely need it. Is it possible to hate an entire people forever? Impossible. If so, please tell me now your position on German film. I cannot stand them. They make me sick. Where's your logic? Burned in Auschwitz. When Kishon, himself a Holocaust survivor, wrote these lines, He did not imagine that less than 2 decades later, he would become the most popular Israeli writer in German-speaking countries. In the 1980s, he moved to German-speaking canton in Switzerland, dividing his time between Germany, Switzerland, and Israel. How did Gideon came to terms with this tension between his aversion for everything German and the embracement of his popularity there? For some, this might appear as opportunism. Yet Gideon framed his fame in Germany as part of his desire for reckoning. He derived a deep sense of satisfaction from the fact that men and women who were reading his books and standing in line waiting to get his autograph could possibly be descendants of SS officers. In an interview at the beginning of the 1990s, he depicted the popularity of his books in Germany as his vengeance upon the Nazi henchmen. Seeing himself as an Israeli writer spending much of his time in German-speaking countries, Gideon conceived his success there, and I quote, as an act of conquest over Germany through the Hebrew language. To be sure, the very notion of payback and revenge was inherited to the concept of shilumim, frequently used to dissolve the tension between what seemed just and what felt right. This applied to shilumim or reparation as a collective recompense to the state of Israel and the Jewish people as much as it did to survivors seeking personal redress. So if we suggested earlier that the German Jewish settlement comprised a form of communicative action, I would now venture the argument that so-called negative emotions and the demand not to forget and not to forgive facilitated these coordinated activities. Like in Michael Ende's never-ending story, when one can go through the magical no-key gate only by not wanting to transpass, the German Jewish settlement facilitated this kind of rapprochement without the sides officially admitted or even aiming at reconciliation. The Israeli philosopher Avishai Margalit's concept of the politics of dignity could, I believe, help us to gain a better insight into the seemingly contradictory nature of the German Jewish settlement. Margalit apprehends the politics of dignity not as a positive, but rather as a negative politics. He argues that this type of politics does not deal with the question of how to promote dignity in every human being by virtue of his or her being human, but rather it asks how to stop humiliation. According to this, by its very nature, the politics of dignity focuses on what some conceived as negative emotions. Underlying this approach is a principle distinguishing between dignity and honor. Within this framework, dignity is not positional and is inherently designed to be accorded to everybody as a common denominator of being human. Honor, on the other hand, if it is bestowed on everybody, honors nobody. This universal disposition of dignity raises the concern that the mere treatment of human beings as humans has very little positive content. Thus, for Margalit, in order for the politics of dignity to promote respect and reciprocity between human beings, it should prioritize the negative and convey tangible consequences. It seems to me that this type of negative dialects underlying the German Jewish settlement as politics of dignity. The Jewish demands for redress was not merely based on a universal notion that human beings should be valued as such. It was a Jewish claim seeking recognition of Jewish victimization under National Socialism. At the same time was Germany preparedness to extend amends was based on the desire to restore German honor and international standing. Framed as reaction to humiliation, so-called negative emotions, such as revenge and resentment, shame and guilt, played a significant role in shaping German-Jewish relations following the Holocaust. Yet while negative emotion helped to make the German-Jewish settlement an effective form of communicative action, they also disconnected the agreement from the study and memory of the Holocaust. One of the main arguments of those opposing the German Jewish settlement was that it will suppress the memory of the Holocaust and promote the emergence of a new German problem. The past, noted the philosopher and Holocaust survivor Vladimir Yankelevich, needs us to come together expressly to commemorate it because the past needs our memory. Fearing the irresistible tide of forgetlessness, Yankelevich called survivors not to claim compensation. "We don't want your money," he proclaimed. "Your marks horrify us, as does even more so your truly German intention of offering them to us." Similar sentiments were expressed by Yankelevich's contemporary Jean Amery. In a talk on the Süddeutsche Rundfunk at the beginning of 1966, Amery reported on a conversation he had at the end of the 50s with a South German businessman, in which the latter politely inquired as to whether Amery is an Israelite. The man then tried to convince Amery that there was no longer any race hatred in Germany. "The German people bear no grudge against the Jewish people," he said. As proof, he cited the government's generous policy of reparations. Amery confessed that in the presence of this man, whose mind was so at ease, he felt as distressed as if he was Shylock demanding his pound of flesh. More recently, the Israeli poet Roni Somek depicted this process of coming to terms with the past as the beauty salon of history. So now I come back to that. And he wrote in this poem in 1996, saying, "The sons of Dr. Mengele sell tractors on the road between Munich and Stuttgart. Whoever buys them will plow the land, water a tree, paint his roof tiles red. And during Oktoberfest, we'll watch the band march in the square like tin soldiers in a shop window. In the beauty salon of history, they know how to calm a forelock even in the hair of a monster." Yet such disdain notwithstanding, and despite the elaborate, often painful effort involved in lodging an indemnification claim, many survivors voted with their feet, seeking to obtain German amends. In her memories, Hadassah Rosensaft admitted that initially she and her husband, Yossel, decided not to claim individual reparation from Germany. They felt that no amount of money could rectify their loss. But given their public position, they were eventually convinced to make a claim in order to encourage other survivors who were of dire need of this support to follow their example. Rosensaft then explained that they accepted redress not as compensation for their suffering or to cancel Germany's debt to the Jewish people, but in the sense that the Germans should pay back at least part of what they had stolen from us. What is interesting is that Rosensaft felt obliged to explain why she and her husband opted to claim compensation. Surely forgiveness did not play a role for most individuals who sought German recompense. Such claims were more likely to have been motivated by deep feeling of entitlement and a desire for vengeance. While survivor claims were based on a narrative of agony, vulnerability, and damage, the official memory culture during the 1950s sought to undermine the passive image of the Holocaust victim, promoting a commemoration of Jewish heroism and active resistance in times of extermination instead. This spirit of empowerment was retained by the Martyrs and Hero Remembrance, so-called Yad Vashem law of 1953, as the title suggested. Stories about Jewish powerlessness that informed the claiming of personal compensation simply did not coincide with the national effort to create a collective memory of the Holocaust based on the idea of Jewish heroism and perseverance. There was nothing heroic or elevating about lodging an indemnification claim. On the contrary, stories about suffering and distress now appeared as solipsistic and opportunistic, if not a mere means to make money. Moreover, for the socialist-dominated Israeli society at the time, personal indemnification represented an individualistic, money-oriented state of mind that challenged the Jewish state idea of collectivism. Nowhere else was this tension more pronounced than within the kibbutzi movement, where many Holocaust survivors were expected to relinquish their right for personal indemnity for the sake of the kibbutz. In order to reconcile the tension between these narratives, the experience of individual survivors needed to be liberated from the context of individual compensation. And be assigned a national, if not a universal meaning. The 1962 Eichmann trial presented such an opportunity. Research already hinted to the political background of this trial, referring to the desire to unify Israel's society in a collective, all-encompassing, patriotic experience and making the Eichmann persecution into a national catharsis. As such, the trial was also supposed to correct the historical depiction of the Zionist leadership and specifically the Mapai Party response to the Holocaust that during the 1950s had become the target of fierce political attacks. Finally, bringing one of the most prominent Nazi officials to Jerusalem gave the state of Israel a unique opportunity to shape the global memory of the Holocaust. The Eichmann trial helped to suppress the Jewish preoccupation of the time with the question of collaboration, bringing the sinisterness of the perpetrators and the suffering of the Jewish victims to the fore. Facing one of the architects of the final solution, marked the departure from the martyrs and heroes' approach to the Holocaust. Instead, a new memory politics emerged, at the heart of which stood the suffering and the powerlessness of the victims of the Holocaust. During the Eichmann trial and during other tribunals that followed, survivors were called to give evidence against the Nazi perpetrators. This practice relocated their testimonies from the private chambers of lawyers to the public space of courtroom, turning the narrative of suffering from means in which to obtain personal compensation to hard evidence and part of a collective effort to bring to justice those who sought to exterminate the Jewish people. In this sense, the trials mark a dramatic shift in the position of the survivor testimonies, making them witnesses of genocide and their experiences part of a collective memory that were becoming ever more susceptible to the suffering of the victim. The new sensitivity towards the suffering of the Jewish victim consolidated feelings of entitlement to individual autonomy, perhaps even relieve the sense of shame that was otherwise associated with such claims. On a collective level, the development of what we can call communicative Holocaust memory that denounced the evil of the perpetrators and accentuated the suffering of the victim helped to validate both the German proclivity to make redress and the Jewish preparedness to accept such payments. From our present day perspective, forgiveness and reconciliation appear superior to harboring negative emotions of anger and resentments. In fact, in more recent transitional justice processes, survivors are frequently expected to move on and not to be prisoners of the past, traumatized, self-preoccupied, resentful, and vindictive. When reckoning with a troubled past, societies and individuals must establish institutions and take painful decisions that foster forgetting as much as remembering. The German Jewish settlement comprised a silent example of such a process. It marked a new stage of the relationship between Jews and Germans as distinguishable, if not antagonistic, identities. In this context, the past played a crucial role in keeping the two troops apart. The fear that the German Jewish settlement would encourage a culture of forgetting and forgiving propelled a collective effort to remember the Holocaust. This memory did not merely seek to recover the Jewish fate under National Socialism, but also its sensibility. That is, it encouraged a feeling of empathy and identification with the victims of the Holocaust, blurring the boundaries between the past and the present. Within this framework, the victims' resentment turned memory to a virtual site of reckoning, rendering a strange phenomena in which, like in Michael Ende's book, Herr Turtur, the Scheinriese, the Holocaust prominence in our public lives seems to increase the more distance we get from the actual event. One outcome of this development was the displacement of the unpopular German Jewish settlements from the study and memory of the Holocaust. We can only speculate on how a more perceptive recollection of the German Jewish settlement would influence the memory and the study of the Holocaust as an intrinsically connected events. But this is a question that I'm happy to take on a different talk, and I would like to thank you all for your patience and looking forward to a discussion.
Thank you so much for this extremely complex analysis of the ambivalences behind the Luxembourg Agreement and the different positions of the agents and different agencies behind this so-called communicative action. I just wonder whether there is a third party in the story, mentally or psychologically, and they are the victims. I can imagine that these dialogues between the survivors and among the survivors were also directed to the victims, so the family members who were lost, and I think it was really a kind of shadow struggle. I know a couple of testimonies, and I just wanted to ask you, how could you put this third group into the analysis?
The third group, you mean the victims?
The victims, yes.
Well, I think the victims, that was what I tried to say. I mean, they were in a way part of the process, but they were not an active agent in the process. So, for instance, when the whole procedure started, and it was made known that Israel approached, well, as it happened, Israel actually approached Germany, but eventually that there will be negotiations. One of the questions that all three parties, the German or the West German government, the claims conference, and the Israel state, the question was who to send. What kind of people should the state of Israel send to such a negotiation? And the same question asked every side. And at least the Israeli side, but also the claims conference, also kind of, we can say also the Jewish side, consciously decided not to send victims, not to send people who were, kind of affected, physically affected. I mean, everybody was affected. I mean, everybody had family that something happened, but they didn't. And what is interesting that in Israel, there were kind of people who immediately said, we should send victims or people who are experts on what happened. Because the German will immediately say, no, it didn't happen. Why should we say, why should we pay? But it's an important point because it really kind of makes us think about the nature of the negotiation. So as I try to say, I mean, this is also why the concept of communicative action is so important because, and I quote it actually twice, because the negotiations were not about what happened. Mm-hmm. That was over. Mm-hmm. Once the Germans agreed to enter negotiations, they kind of accepted the responsibility. The negotiations were actually about the future, not about the past. That was also the source of these worries that such a negotiation basically means putting the past behind, kind of a Schlussstrich, and moving forward. And this, I think, is a crucial point because the people who were involved knew that, and they were very careful not to send, victims to that because of this fear that it will turn to about the past. So this is where I think, where the victims initially come. After that, of course, in later periods, and I'm mainly interested in the kind of the first 20 years, this was something that, the victims were very much in the background. They were not, the claims conference itself did not have representation from the victims. Mm-hmm. Its 23 organizations, 0 victims organizations. Only in the 1990s, the first victim organizations joined the claims conference. So the victims were there, but the idea was that, at least from the Jewish side, that we, representative of the Jewish people, will take care of the victims. We know better what, it's a very paternalistic kind of approach. And of course, there was no real dialogue, at least, I mean, some victims had a dialogue, for instance, German. There's a huge difference, I think, between victims who were German Jews, who could come to Germany, negotiate directly their, or Austria actually as well, their kind of claims, and other Jews who didn't, I mean, you saw this, this claim, yeah, from my grandmother. In German, my grandmother did not, I mean, I'm sure she knew a few words in German, she spoke perfect Yiddish, but, you know, it was, everything needed to be mitigated, everything needed to be translated. So there was, and it was also over there, yeah? I mean, the claims came from all over the world, not only from Germany, or not only from German Jews. So I think there was a very complex, I think it took a long time until, you know, there was a delay until they really kind of realized, you know, this change of the status of the victim.
You used the words Jews and Germans, sometimes very symbolically, sometimes very generally, and I know that it's a tricky way to use these words, but I just wonder whether we can put the GDR in this game. So what about these Germans? And on the other hand, I would like to know more about the diaspora Jews. So not the Israeli Jews, but rather the diaspora Jews, and especially the Jewish survivors of Eastern Europe. Whether they recognized the Luxembourg Agreement, what was their position in the discussion, or they were imagined only as victims, far from the whole story between Israel and West Germany.
Again, first of all, I mean, to the second, it wasn't only a story of Israel and the West Germany. It was a story of Israel, Jewish organization representing world Jewry and West Germany. So the diaspora Jewry was always involved. What is also kind of the new phenomena here, that there's a new phase in the kind of the relationship between Israel and the diaspora. So suddenly Israel becomes a kind of a potential homeland of all Jews. So they, in a way, they kind of, this agreement, I would dare to argue, kind of normalizes the relationship between Jews and diaspora, because until then, you know, Jews or diaspora Jews were, you know, didn't have any reference to, I mean, it was the kind of ideal place of origins. After, especially this agreement, suddenly, you know, Israel became, in a way, although, you know, most diaspora Jews did not originated from Israel, but in a way it had a kind of this type of relationship. And I think this really very much changed that. And also these type of agreements between Israel and the Claims Conference, and the fact that the Claims Conference, and again, the Claims Conference is an organization of over 20 other organizations, or Jewish organizations. So they represent a very variety of Zionist, not Zionist, religious, not all kinds of types of organizations. And by this, or with this agreement, in a way they recognize the kind of, you know, Israel as a legitimate, kind of representative, an option for being Jewish, which was not the case until then. To the question about Germany, I mean, you know, it's interesting because, again, this agreement entails a kind of an assumption. Basically, it says Jews and Germans are not compatible. The solution is to separate them. And if you look at the sources, the Jewish sources, they always speak about the Germans. They don't really differentiate very much, although of course they were very much aware. Now, very practically, yeah, Israel demanded, what did Israel got reparation for? So Israel got reparations for absorbing 500,000 Jewish refugees from Europe, from National Socialism. 500,000 Jewish refugees, each refugee $3,000. That's what Israel calculated as the cost of absorbing these refugees. 3,000, if you, 500,000 you multiply by 3,000, you get the number $1.5 billion. That was the claim Israel put forward to Germany. Now, because Germany was divided, so Israel said 2/3 that's West Germany, 1/3 that's East Germany, 1 billion West Germany, 500 million East Germany. They wrote a letter to all, because they didn't want to speak directly to Germans, so the only way to do that is to approach the allies. So they wrote a letter to all the allies, including the Soviets, because without the Soviets, nothing would have happened. The Soviets said, well, basically the Soviet ignored, so nothing happened, and eventually something happened in the West. So when Israel in the Claims Conference started negotiating with West Germany, the negotiation itself was, and it's interesting because Germany until then always claimed to represent whole of Germany, not only, but in this case, they were happy just to represent West Germany, and the initial negotiations were just about this 1 billion. Yeah, and not about the 1.5. And now, by the way, there's in Israel a lawsuit that once, I recently represented the lawyer that represent these people, that they are basically trying to revive this 500 million to claim that the Germans will pay that as well. Mm-hmm. But, in a way, these are big kind of concepts, but that's how they talked at the time.
Mm-hmm. Extremely interesting. So, and now I would like to open the floor for questions and comments of the audience. So, who wants to start asking or commenting the lecture?
So, my question is indeed, how did the people, for example, in Eastern Europe, knew about this treaty, and how did they know that they could claim? So the Jews that were still survived in Eastern Europe or went back, or was there some sort of...
I think, first of all, it depends what period. I must also admit this is not really my area of expertise. To the best of my knowledge, they couldn't claim. And I know also of cases of, this whole idea was not only, it was, eventually, when we talk about personal compensation, so the German government, part of the treaty with the Claim Conference, that the Germans will kind of improve their compensation legislation. So in the law, it says victims of National Socialism, So victims of National Socialism are not only Jews, yeah? So you have incidents of people, for instance, who are victims living in East Berlin, having registered themselves in West Berlin in order to claim compensation. There was a very, we are living here in the period of the Cold War. Everything is through this lens as well. The Germans, and of course also the Allies, because nothing would have, you can't go through without the okay of the Americans. Yeah, this was something that they didn't want to do, but I think everybody knew about it. And maybe Eva, you know more about this. For instance, how
in
it was
Hungary,
Hungary.
They knew about it,
yeah.
And they also tried to apply, but without any success. So there are some documentations about the very early applications.
Yeah, they knew about it because also of the Jewish organizations that moved around and encouraged people to, they wanted people would claim, because there was this option and they wanted people would claim. And then they started. immediately after they kind of signed off the agreement, Claims Conference comes to Vienna and opens here an office and tried to work with, I mean, still they didn't have an Austrian state, but they're already kind of preparing, you know. So they did that.
I don't want to open the spectrum even broader, but as I remember, I don't know, when I remember correctly, the Luxembourg Agreement made it possible for the Roma and Sinti communities in Köln, so in Cologne, and then this region, to articulate their claims without any success. Otto Pankok was one of the representatives of these Roma and Sinti groups who wanted to have also a kind of reconciliation. And it happened in early 50s, and I think it was, I have to check my sources on the literature, but I think it would be really interesting to show this communicative action. So if you start to discuss something, and you have these NGOs and the different agencies there, then you cannot stop the discussion, because the next family will listen to it, and the friend will get some information, and of course, then they start to think about it.
Yeah.
Whether I can reframe my suffering within this context or not.
Yeah, but that is also what happened. So once the German kind of, you know, made the legislation, of course, I mean, it included a lot of all kinds of type of victimhood, but also excluded a lot of people. And then, of course, these people protested.
Yeah.
So, and they put pressure on the German, eventually put pressure on the German government. So you had the first law, I think it was issued in 1953. Then you have an amendments in 1956, and then again in 1965. So, and this process starts, and all the time you have this back and forth between the sides. And each time, especially Jewish organization, the Claims Conference, United Restitution Organization, which was an organization of Jewish lawyers that helped people to claim compensation, which was a key organization. And they all the time come back to the Germans and say, look, you have to recognize this experience, because, I mean, at the end of the day, if you think about it, who is a victim of National Socialism? You know, or everyone or maybe no one. I mean, so, but once you have it on paper, written as a law, then you have to define who qualifies as a victim and who's not. And this is a huge thing.
Yes, I also think.
Yeah? And today we don't reflect about this. But back then, I kind of mentioned that, this envy between the survivors, this friction between the survivor communities in that period was immense. Yeah? People, for instance, at the beginning, were expelled, who ended up in Siberia, were not eligible to claim. Eventually it was changed.
Forced labor, the whole forced labor story.
A lot, you know, people who were in hiding and not in concentration. If you were in a concentration camp, but sometimes people were in hiding, and then of course you have all these issues of how you prove what you actually, how you know, people could prove. So it is a huge and very complex, you know, process, and I think the research, at least historians, really kind of underestimated the importance of this, you know, all, you know, the event or what happened there.
Johann Böhler wants to continue.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for a really fascinating lecture, especially because you had this take on talking about issues that we usually as historians look at from the material side. No? Look how many recompensation has been paid, how many has been claimed, and so on. And you made it at a totally different perspective, like from the side of emotional history. And I found it really I have to think a lot about it. My question is, because you were also talking about the process of communication, I would like to ask you to tell us a little bit more also on the German or West German side, especially because you started your talk with this strange atmosphere in Luxembourg, that even the participants didn't speak with each other. It is highly unusual, yeah? And a part of it also what happens outside. No? They were afraid of Jewish extremists. Luxembourg is not so far from the German border. It was kind of kept very low-key, almost secret. What is the atmosphere in the German Federal Republic at that time, and why these special arrangements?
I mean, the special arrangements were mainly because of the Jewish side rather than the German side. There were, I don't know, I'm not sure how kind of well known, there were bombs. There was a bomb sent to Adenauer in 1952. It exploded in Munich, and one policeman was killed and a few were injured. During the talks in Wassenaar, there were another few bombings. There were also a bomb in Israel where, I know, Dov Shilansky, who eventually became the parliament chairman in the 50s, walked in, back then the foreign office was in Tel Aviv, and he was caught at the entry of the Israeli foreign ministry with a bag on a bomb inside. And there were all kinds of attempts to not only kind of violent demonstration, but really kind of to sabotage the whole procedure. It was less so in Germany. So when the bomb in Munich was, because there was a huge manhunt, once they realized that there was a bomb, it was sent to Adenauer and all that. And at the beginning, the press said it's probably right-wing extremists, neo-Nazis or whatever, but relatively quickly they realized that it was kind of, Jews who did that. So immediately it was hushed. And look, at the end of the day, I think in Germany, there was this kind of ambivalence, because I have to be careful here, because again, I'm very much still in the beginning of this journey about this topic, but we have to understand, I mean, Germany was then also struggling with refugees, all the, Vertriebene, all the people were expelled, and there was also a lot of pressure to compensate them, to see them as victims of National Socialism, and in a way, you can say that this agreement with Israel and the Jewish organization piggybacked what the German government had in mind to compensate these people. And you had, the equalization, how you call it, the
Lastenausgleich.
Yeah, which was basically a kind of a compensation arrangement for such people. And so these things were, happened simultaneously, and actually, it has a huge effect, and it's not always clear what is the relationship. There's a kind of a gray zone there that I think still needs to be really looked at. So I think that in Germany, of course, it was very unpopular, because who wants to pay? And also, if you look very carefully, and again, there is research about that, about the history of the negotiation itself. So Germany accepted and acknowledged responsibility, but once they started the negotiation, it was very, quickly, the Israeli side and the Jewish side realized that actually they're not coming here to pay anything. So immediately they kind of dragged on, and when the negotiation started, a few months earlier, another negotiations about German external debt opened in London. And the German Hermann Abs, who was responsible for the German negotiations in London with I think over 20 states. And it's, for those who don't know, it was basically about the Reich's external debts, all kinds of debts that, were taken already before National Socialism, and then during National Socialism, and then eventually some states said you have to pay it back. And Germany, accepted the responsibility, again, because of this, idea that they are the legitimate heirs of Germany, of the Reich. And Abs, basically, his approach was that the Jewish issue, the negotiation with Israel and the Jewish organization, should be seen as part of this larger context. So it's another depth. And then there was the question, which priority, which should come first? And Abs said, look, we are negotiating here with a lot of states, a lot of us in stake here. First we solve this, and then we're going to take care of the, of Israel and the Jewish conferences. And that created, of course, a huge crisis, which eventually changed. But the general public wasn't really aware on part of this until, because of this kind of tension, the head of the German delegation and his deputy threatened to resign. Eventually, the head of the German delegation did not resign. And then, of course, everything changed. But there was a kind of a very short period of time where there was this scandal. And once it was established that a settlement is in sight, immediately a new problem arises, and that also kind of shows you how modern this whole thing is, because Israel is in the Middle East, and immediately Arab states said no, and put a lot of pressure on the West German government to stop the negotiation and kind of jeopardize this whole agreement. And of course, that was the point where public opinion really turned against this whole thing. And again, I'm not sure, I don't think that today we have politicians that will be so bold and carry these things through. The Germans sent actually a delegation to Egypt to talk with with the representative of the Arab League. There was also a delegation of the Arab League in Germany. But eventually, the German government decided to go ahead and approve the agreement, which was very courageous under these circumstances. But I think, again, as I try to kind of argue in the paper, I mean, I think that kind of created this kind of discrepancy that, on the one hand, everybody was aware that it's a huge step, a leap of faith, and something that has a kind of very huge significance. But at the same time, it was very quickly pushed away from the public from public eye, and the agreement was ratified at the beginning of 1953. At the end of 1953, a few months later, in September 1953, there was an election. This whole thing did not appear in the election.
Because of the unsuccess of the earlier negotiations, or?
No, it wasn't because both the CDU and the socialists who were in favor of the agreement didn't have any interest to
continue
to kind of make it as a topic for the elections. And of course, at that time already the economic miracle already was visible. So there were other issues, and this thing, and nobody actually made it to a topic.
Any other questions here? Yes, please.
I think Thank you also for a quite interesting talk. I just short comment about that you said that this agreement is about the future, not about the past. And there was from the Jewish side some kind of skepticism or not that it tries to hide the past, what happened. But it's always at stake. If you want to open the future, you somehow has to begin from the beginnings. And somehow there is a danger to hide the past or to cover it. So, for example, I imagine that if I do something bad to someone and then I recognize it and I offer an apology, the someone on the other side can take it as a fake or take it seriously, that I really mean it. So the Israelis or the Jewish side can, these both options were, let's say, possible for them. Either it is some kind of, the Germans, it is fake, so they just give us money and the money somehow tries to push the past away. Or we can take it seriously, that this money from Germany is the recognition of the past, what happened. So, and these both options are always possible, even in the case, or for example, when I offer an apology to someone, when I say sorry, the other guy or woman can say, I don't believe you, or I can believe. And then the past is, and when the other side accepts this apology, then the bad thing, what I have done, is somehow over. And this opens the future of our possible relations again. So I think that this, let's say, if this is your argument, this is not about the past, it is rather about the future. It is both, let's say, it is directed in both directions, so to say, I would say.
Well, I mean, that's not really my argument, because my question is, first of all, why is this agreement marginalized in our memory of the Holocaust and actually also study of the Holocaust? Although it's very much part of that story. And my, kind of answer for it is that, it was because of this fear of forgetting and forgiving, because of what you say, accepting the apology, not accepting all these kind of ambivalence, it was, in a way, maybe even unconsciously, I don't think it was a really conscious decision, but it kind of happened that it was simply ignored, and that's why I find this metaphor of this kind of key gate so important, because it wasn't supposed to be about reconciliation, about a new phase. It wasn't the intention, definitely not from the Jewish side, neither from Israel nor from the Jewish. Of course, there were always Jews that, there were Martin Buber and all kinds of people who said, let's move on, let's kind of, start a new, but the majority, I think, of people simply did not kind of, it wasn't on the horizon. But in this, actually, this type of kind of erasing this whole thing is what made it eventually so successful, if you want. I mean, I know it kind of sound, like you say, very complex, but it's like, sometimes we, at night, we can't sleep, and we say, we have to sleep now, and we, it simply can. You say, so you have to sleep, but you can't, and you need to simply kind of forget, and maybe then you can, fall asleep. So here it's very much the same, because what actually interests me is the place and the role of the agreement itself. Because as we said before, and as people at that time already realized that, it is a momentous event. Because, just imagine, we are speaking here about people, it's 7 years after the Holocaust,
That's what I wanted to
It's
say.
still warm, it's the same people. And then they sit together like this and talk to each other. We can't underestimate this, and this is also why the history of emotion is so important here, because it's a very emotional kind of thing. And you have to have this kind of conceptual framework, I think, in order to make sense of it. And also to make sense of the fact that it was totally repressed and marginalized. And I think only now we reach the phase, and we have this conference coming up next year, and this year there's a few events because of the anniversary. But now we are reaching the phase where we can go back to it and really examine things in more relaxed way. I mean, not that there were no work on this agreement before, there was. But I didn't, if you look at the historians who did this kind of type of work before, just name them one by one. There are not so many, I don't want to do this name dropping here, but none of them is considered a Holocaust historian. I can guarantee you that.
Any other questions? Okay, Jochen. I'm really happy that you mentioned these 7 years, because I think it's extremely important, and it's not easy to imagine that they were contemporaries and they had totally different experiences. So the so-called, in German, Erfahrungshorizont, were 100% different. So how can you start a dialogue between the Israeli politicians and the German politicians having this totally, fully different Erfahrungshorizont of the two parties? And I think this was a miraculous event, as you also mentioned, because usually politics cannot reach this peak. And they reached.
They did, yeah.
Okay, sorry, just wanted
No, I mean, just a
this.
comment on that, because again, this politics of who to send was very important. There was a first meeting between Adenauer and two Israeli representatives in April 1952. Was that 52 or 1951? 1951, sorry. And then in this encounter, the Israelis sent the person who was the ambassador of Israel in France, and David Horowitz, who was a representative of the Israeli treasury, to talk with Adenauer. Both of them are not German Jews. And they had problems with that. They actually didn't want to go. Anyway, they agreed to go, and they met Adenauer in Paris. And all the reports that we have on that meeting, that it was a disaster. At the beginning, they came and say, we don't want to speak German. Adenauer said, I don't speak any other language. So they start speaking German. And then eventually, immediately, it became this back and forth about the past. They start lecturing him about German guilt, and he didn't really understand, because he's head of state and he's making a gesture, meeting these two junior kind of diplomats or state officials. Anyway, when eventually they started, thinking about the negotiation, the state of Israel eventually sent a delegation. The three main heads of this delegation were all German Jews. One of the really amazing events in these negotiations eventually was that they decided beforehand, the two Jews, not to speak German. One day, the claims conference sent American Jews mainly. They didn't know German, so it was in English. They started the negotiation, the Israelis and the Germans, and they read all kinds of declaration. The Israelis read it in English, and then it was translated to the Germans. The Germans read it in German. Although all the Israelis understood German, it was allegedly translated to them. It was a lengthy, very complicated process. That day 2 of the conference, at some point, the head of Israeli delegations knocks on the table and says, over. Now we're going to start speaking German. And then it starts kind of moving. Yeah, so it's very important, these kind of... Yeah, but personally, these kind of type of decisions, although, the Israelis were instructed not to speak German, but it was tolerated.
Yes, I don't have a question. I have so many, but we can still talk after this meeting. And but a comment, especially in regard to the anecdote you retold from Jean Améry meeting this Bavarian businessman, and there is so much in it. Also, if we look at this German side of how to look at the issue, because like the question also that we just heard, addressing that the guilt of the victim of surviving and reminding the perpetrator generation society of what happened before, and you can even see it in the very long durée, because at the beginning of the years of the 2000s there was this other issue of the paying for Jews that had been working for the Germans in the ghettos, the so-called Ghetto-Renten. And there is also a very emotional side to it, because most of those who claimed pensions for having worked for the Germans in ghettos were regarded by the German social security courts as liars. Yeah, and there was a very emotional side to it. It had nothing to do with a real material compensation. So I think there is something, and I would also encourage you. I found it very fascinating how you developed the picture, how it was discussed on the Jewish side, and I think there is also kind of this tension between how the generations in Germany after the Holocaust, the perpetrators and their descendants dealt with the topic as well, and it's not over.
Closing remarks.
Well, I thank you all for coming and staying so late, and thank you for comments and questions. I think it's a topic that's going to start becoming more kind of come to the fore more and more now. We're going to have hopefully more events on this. I think, as you said, we're just beginning to realize the impact of all that, and especially because it's just the 1952 agreement is just the beginning, and it's still ongoing. I mean, the process is still ongoing. And of course, there are also other aspects that we didn't even, I kind of expected some question here about that, because there's also the Austrian aspect, which is also, another issue that probably, I think, in another event you're going to discuss here.
We will have a roundtable discussion on the 24th of November. With the biggest players of the Austrian restitution discussion, so everybody is welcome, of course, to this event as well. So please check our website, and you will find the detailed program soon.
So I think we are just kind of in the beginning in a new phase and it's very exciting, because also in terms of I must say, of the archives, there are in Germany alone around, it's an estimation, but it's estimated around 5 million claim files. It doesn't mean that it's 5 million people, because one person can, make a few claims. And these files sit in Germany. There's around the world other files or similar files. It's basically the last kind of Holocaust-related archive that is still untapped.
You mean?
No, the claims conference. It's, nobody actually really worked systematically with it. There's now a project in the German Treasury or Finance Ministry to digitize these claims, which will be an amazing kind of, project. And as I showed you here, I mean, these claims contain a lot of information. These are kind of raw testimonies. One can do a lot of things with them. Most of them are the first time that people ever talked about their experiences. So there's a huge potential, and it will basically, give work for historians and other scholars for years to come.
And not mentioning the transitional justice, redress, so many other contexts which were not inherent part of Holocaust studies could be applied to the framework, which is also extremely important, I guess. So thank you so much for this absolutely inspiring talk. Thank you for the very, very interesting and really supportive questions. As we see, Gideon is working on this project. He just received another big project in the Israeli Institute for Advanced Studies with a research group of 8 other scholars, and will go deeper and deeper in this topic. So good luck, and thank you so much for the
Thank you for
presentation.
having me.